Hey everyone, this is Oscar from Underdog, and as you can see, I'm not in my usual studio today. I'm visiting my family in Ireland for the first time since the pandemic. But even the fact that I'm on the road right now is not going to stop me from geeking out with you over some music production. And in particular, I want to introduce you to a band that my sister introduced me to called Glass Animals. They've been around for a while, they've got a couple of albums under their belt, and I would describe their sound design as always very warm, round, very full, and overall, from an electronic point of view, really beautifully produced. With a great combination of acoustic elements, but also a very strong electronic production philosophy behind it. So I figured let's look at their most popular song at the moment and break it down and see what we can learn from that. So I'm excited to show you the 4 chapters. It's going to be the beat, it's going to be the music theory, it's going to be the sound design, and it's going to be the arrangement. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Before we go any further, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon, that really helps with the algorithm, leave a comment below, and also consider signing up for one of our classes on underdog.brussels. We're an online music school, not just a YouTube channel. Okay, let's talk about the beat because I think it's overall the simplest part of this production. First of all, we're working at a hip-hop tempo, approximately 81 beats per minute. So what we've got here is a kick pattern that goes at half time. Look at this. So this is a really sparse pattern with a lot of space in between notes because that's going to leave a lot of space for our bass later on. And this really comes to its right when you match it up with the clap as well. Here we go. So those two really go hand in hand. One without the other, it sounds kind of silly. There's nothing special about the kick, it's just a tough kick. I went through my sample library, found a good sample, and called it a day. I didn't overthink that. Then for the clap, I did a little bit more. What I did was I stacked on top of each other an 808 snare drum and an 808 clap at the same time. Listen to those two layers separately. So here's the snare drum, and then here's the clap, and then together. It has all the benefits of the snare drum, which has a lot of punch around 200 Hertz, and then the top end of the clap, which is nice and rich. And the way I've done this is I've put a sampler there, and I've grouped the sampler and created a new chain. So you can layer sounds and synthesizers and whatever, they all take the same MIDI data. It comes into what's called an instrument rack, and they all play that same MIDI information coming out together. So that's how I have these multiple chains here in this one instrument rack. Then the tail end of these were a little bit too long, so I added a gate. Check this out. The tail goes on a little bit long, and so if I put a gate on there, it becomes a little snappier. Just a little snappier so it doesn't have that long tailing out end because we want this to really push the rhythm forward. Then on top of that, we've got some very basic 808 hi-hats. And literally the only thing that I'm doing here is I'm putting on some pretty heavy sidechain compression so that they kind of duck every time that the kick hits. You'll notice it when you just listen to the hi-hats. See here visually, whenever it ducks, you hear the hi-hats kind of falling backwards. That's a cool way to give movement to the hi-hats and make everything feel like it's responding to each other. Then on the utility, I just monoed it because this one sample was actually stereo and I wanted it right in the middle. Then a last but not unimportant element is the tom, which plays just every now and then, adding a little bit of syncopation to the kick. So that just adds a little bit of push and pull to the low end of the track. And there's also an element that they use a lot just before they drop the beats during a break. They have the break and then they play this tom and then they play the first kick drum. It's like da-boom. It kind of leads into it like that. And that's it. That's the whole beat. Nothing more to it than that. Now let's move on to the music theory because here's where I think it gets interesting. So if you don't know anything about music theory at all, I would recommend you first watch this video right here, which is going to give you a brief overview of what a scale is, what a chord is, and what a chord progression is, because those are the key elements that you need to understand to make sense of what we're about to do right here. But it's not that complicated, and honestly, you will be able to follow along if you watch that video. So without further ado, let's look at the chords of this song. Now you have some people whose ears are trained enough to pick out chords when they hear them. They can say, oh, I can hear that chord. I'm not one of those people. I'm still training my ears to get better at that. However, there's a cheat code, and that is to just go find the chords somewhere else online, especially for pop music. That's all available on guitartabs.com. No affiliation, by the way. This is just the way I've been doing it for a long time. So if you go to the song on guitartabs.com, it tells you all the chords that are in the song, plus it shows you exactly which notes they are. You can see them right here. You can ignore the strumming pattern unless you're a guitarist, but down further you can see all the lyrics and the chord progression. So here we got C sharp minor, B, G sharp minor, F, E, B, G sharp minor, F. You'll see the same 8 chords coming back again and again and again in the same order in this song. And so that's going to be our chord progression. But first, let's take a closer look at the chords that are in there and try to determine the key that this song is in based on the chords. So let's assume that the song is going to use only notes from one key. Not all songs obey that rule, but many do. So all we'd have to do is we'd have to take ourselves a little paintbrush and on the keyboard, write in which are the notes that are in the scale. So I'm just looking up here at C sharp major and I'm going to draw those in, okay? So here we go. There we go. Then let's look at this G sharp minor. That's a good one. G sharp minor is like this. Remember that it's an octave, so you can move them up and down the octave. We're just trying to figure out which are the legal notes and which are the illegal notes, so to speak, for this song. Let's see, is this one? Yeah, this is one. And then is this one? Yes, that's the octave up. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then here we're still missing one. It's this one. Great. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes. And if you look a bit closer, you can see here there's a formula to construct a major scale. So the question that we are asking ourselves now is, which notes do we take as the root note so that then when we use this formula to construct a scale around it, it delivers all the right notes that we were already going to use anyway. Now let me just add some of these notes in an octave lower so that we can have a look. And you'll see that in fact, if we choose B as our root note, then you can go from B, you can say plus 2 semitones, plus 2 semitones, plus 1 semitone, plus 2 semitones, plus 2 semitones, plus 2 semitones, plus 1 semitone, and we are back where we started. So this song is very likely in B major. It's always easy to go back to the major scale because it's a solid reference point. You could equally say that this is in G sharp minor because that's the relative minor of the B major scale. And either way, it's kind of ambiguous. I guess it just depends on which note you would consider home. If you would consider B home or if you would consider G sharp home. But in this song, I feel like it's a bit ambiguous. We use both of those chords. And so for simplicity's sake, I'm going to count everything as if it's in the B major scale. So cool, so if we are in the B major scale, what is the chord progression that we're supposed to be doing? C sharp minor, B, G sharp minor, F. Let's do that. So we go C sharp minor, B, G sharp minor, F. That is the second, that is the first, that is the sixth, and that is the fifth. In that order. So we could say that this is a 2 because it's minor, we do lowercase. 1 because it's major. 6, we do it minor because it's a minor chord. And then 5, that's also major. But our chord progression doesn't stop there. It then has an E, a B, a G sharp minor, and an F. But notice that B, G sharp minor, and F is something that we've already done. So that's something we can copy paste. It's just that the C sharp minor is replaced by an E. So let's go back into our thing and find E here. So what is E? E is 1, 2, 3. It's the 4th note of the scale. So we're going to write it as a 4, like that. 4, 1, 6, 5. Now these chords get repeated over and over throughout the song, over and over. The entire song is just these chords, with one exception during the break, which I'll discuss later. So is this a 4-chord chord progression, or maybe an 8-chord chord progression? But the way I would describe it is a 4-chord chord progression, but one of the things that you often see is that the 2 and the 4 are often interchangeable. People in compositions, wherever a 2 fits, they might put a 4 instead, or where a 4 fits, they might put a 2 instead. So in fact, this is a 4-chord chord progression, but repeated twice with just a slight modification to keep it feeling fresh as the chords move around. Let's have a closer listen to this in practice. So here we are back in Ableton, and whenever we're discussing music theory, I just like to use sine waves. Pure sine waves because they're the cleanest and we're not distracted by the sound design of the element. Now, as you can see, I've already created a MIDI clip right here that already has the names of these things in it, and it goes like this. One thing you might immediately notice is this incredible downwards motion here. This is something that Glass Animals do a lot. Another good example of that would be in their song Gooey, where the bass line also is just a walking bass line going all the way down. So you've got this kind of descending motion before you come up for a breather in the second half. Now all I've done is I've taken the notes as we've described them, played them for half a bar, and then constructed the triads over them. There's nothing special about this. Also, there are no inversions in this. It's just straight up the chords that we found in the music theory part. Now this leads us to the next part, which is sound design and composition. How can we use these chords to create the musical texture, all the different synthesizers? How can this inform our composition? Let's come back to the beat section where we were before and start introducing some elements using our music theory. So here is the beat. The first thing we're going to want to do is put in a bass line. That's almost always the most straightforward thing. Once you've got your music theory nailed down, then you know where your bass line is going to go. The bass almost always plays the root note of the chord. And in the original composition, there's this long sustained bass line, which means that it starts playing, stays at the same volume mostly throughout, and then it doesn't have multiple hits in between. It just hits once and holds, and then once and holds whenever the chord changes. And so we're going to want to play just the root notes of the chords, which is just where you delete the triad over the top of it. And it's going to sound, with sine waves, it's going to sound something like this. Now already the song starts to have a character. As you know, the chords determine the emotional content of your song. So once you play a bass, you're already kind of indicating what the chords are going to be, and the audience will immediately start feeling an emotion. This gets even more pronounced when you actually add some sound design instead of just sine waves. On its own, this sounds a little bit buzzy, but in a very busy mix, I think it's good to have quite a bit of mid-range on this bass sound, because the bass almost never plays in isolation. It always plays in the context of this very busy mix, and so it needs quite a bit of mid-range to be identifiable, especially on small speakers. What I did for the bass was a very simple sawtooth wave through a low-pass filter with some overdrive, some sidechain compression, and a little bit of EQing. Very basic stuff, and if you want to get a handle on making your own synthesizer patches like this, check out my 2 videos, one on subtractive synthesis here, and then the one on how to learn any synth right there. In those videos you learn the theory concepts and the building blocks on how to get it stuck into any synthesizer and start getting sounds that match what's in your head. Now a small caveat here is that on re-listening, I think that the original song might be using 808s instead of a sustained bass line. An 808, when you're talking in the hip-hop world anyway, is actually a kick drum from the Roland 808 drum machine, which is stretched to be longer and then distorted, so it sounds like a bass line, and then it's played at various pitches, and it's a very characteristic sound in hip-hop. But anyway, the bass that I did for me is close enough once you get into the full flow of the composition, so let's keep moving. Now a second element that's very important but is very subtle in the original composition is the soft side pads. There are these very soft synthesizers that are completely in the sides that sound a little bit like this. If you're wearing headphones, you can hear this very clearly in the sides. Let me quickly flip that to mono so you can appreciate that. If you're listening to this on headphones, I want you to pay attention to the stereo image right now when I hit mono on this, okay? So a particularly tasty production has some stereo information, even if all the important elements are actually positioned in the middle of the stereo field. There's still some stereo information that comes through, and that gives your ears something to pay attention to. And again, for this, I just created myself a simple patch. I did something between a triangle wave and a sawtooth wave on the wavetable. But the real secret here is that I used both oscillators, and I panned one oscillator entirely left, the other oscillator entirely right. Then I detuned one a couple of cents and the other one detuned a couple of cents in the opposite direction. That means that the information in the left ear and the information in the right ear are slightly different, which immediately gives a huge amount of width to your production. Then I low pass it quite heavily so that it's nice and dark, because without that it's like a bit too buzzy. And of course there's this lush reverb on there that's just massive, and some overdrive as well to give it a little bit of crunch. Let me exaggerate the overdrive just for fun. Just a touch to heat things up a little. Then some equalization to balance it in the mix, but as this is not a mixing tutorial, I won't go into that too much. Then I want to talk for a moment about the guitar. There's a guitar in this song, and I am not a guitarist, and I don't have access to a guitar, and I also don't have any very good guitar plugins. So I had to approximate this element, and you're never going to quite get a guitar tone from something that's not a guitar, because guitar playing has a particular timbre to it, and also you can pick up those slides and the hand noises as people are moving across the neck of the guitar. So what I came up with sounds like this. Now, if you're a beginner, you might say, whoa, how did you figure out all of those notes? Well, here's a secret. These notes are very predictable. What they are is a strumming pattern over the chords that we've already established. Let me do that in sine waves here for a second. All this is our chords. Let me just extend them. Bing. Are chords in disguise. These are called broken chords. And in the context of a guitar, what you're doing is you play a strumming pattern over them. What you do in the context of an electronic music synthesizer is you play an arpeggio over them. Either way, what you're just doing is you're taking the chords as the structure and then playing those notes from it individually. And it's always the same pattern. It goes dum, 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 dum. And it always follows the same pattern. You take the first note of the chord, second note of the chord, third one, then the first one, and the third one, and the second one. And then you move on to the next chord. And you do the exact same pattern again and again and again, just as if you had set up an arpeggiator and you would feed chords into that arpeggiator. Here I did it by hand because it was the simplest way. I just needed to get the exact copy of the Glass Animals sound. Then I went into Ableton and found something that sounded a little bit like more or less a realistic guitar. And I put an amplifier on it, some chorus, some delay, some overdrive, some reverb, some frequency shifter. What the frequency shifter does is it adds a little bit of warble to it. It's a bit of a strange technique, but when you put it to ring modulation and make it really slow, this is what you get. That wobbling. If I just do a little bit of that, I wanted to really blur this sound. I wanted to kind of push it back. I wanted to make it low definition. I did not want it to sound pristine and clean like a modern synthesizer. I wanted it to sound like some old gear that's run through other old gear. Another place where you see that is in this EQ8, where I do this kind of a telephone scoop. So when you scoop out all the lows and all the highs from something, you're left with only the mids, and it's easy to sound like it's coming from an old radio or from a telephone. This is a kind of, I call it telephone scoop or the old radio scoop. And then of course I sidechain it to the kick again. And so you get this element that's really blurred and that's moving a lot in the mix. And that's kind of what I was going for. So there we go. Now we're almost there, but this is the first iteration of the beat, and we'll talk about the arrangement in a moment. But in the second arrangement, there are a few more elements here, some padding waves, and I want to talk a little bit about them for a second. If you zoom in, what we're talking about is these elements. These are just some synthesizers that are added to create density in the climax. And all they are is some sawtooth waves run through some low-pass filters, like most sounds are. They have a little bit of a pluck at the start of them. So there we go. You've got this secondary envelope that's opening the filter slightly at the start. And then we've just got some reverb and some EQ. And I guess something worth mentioning is a little bit of this unison as well, because if you exaggerate that, you get this really distorted sound. It's just adding a little bit of density to this sound. It's a nice touch. Then if you look at this other one, the way that this is programmed is that it's playing the same notes as the first padding wave synth, but it's playing them on the upbeat, right? It's playing them whenever you get the downbeat, upbeat, downbeat, upbeat, downbeat, upbeat. This creates a lot of movement and it makes the whole thing more danceable. And in terms of sound design, I started with the same patch as the first one, but I used a bandpass filter to go up higher. It's playing it an octave higher. It's not got the envelope mapped to the filter, and it's got some chorus, some reverb, and that's it. It's quite a simple sound. And together, they're both quite simple sounds, but the way they call and response against each other really does add some dimension, and the way they sit inside the mix adds a lot of depth. Now I haven't mentioned it yet, but in the original there is a very prominent vocal running throughout the entire track, and so you have to think in terms of composition that this is a very prominent mid-range element that's going to be bright and take a lot of mid-range attention. So almost the entire beat is just a complement to those vocals. And that's one reason why this beat should not have any element that attracts too much attention to itself. All of these elements need to behave and play nicely with each other, with no element taking a huge amount of attention to itself, because that's going to be the space for the vocal later. I'm not going to do the vocal in this tutorial today. It's not my speciality, maybe for another time. Now let's move on to part 4, which is the arrangement, because this is a place where some exciting things actually do happen. So what did I do here? First of all, I dragged the track into my timeline and I had a little look at what was going on. First, let's talk about the different parts, all right? So if I position myself like this, first what you've got is a 6-bar intro here, where everything feels like it's in a kind of a telephone, again with the low scoop and the high scoop leaving only kind of thinned out mids. Then here you've got a section of beat. The beat is basically what we've just already created. Then there's this version of the beat which has this kind of deep vocal running through it, but it's a bit of a catchy hook. It's a secondary hook that's definitely not the hook of the song. And then we start. Here's the chorus with the sometimes all I think about is you, etc. And it does that twice. Then we go into a verse, another verse, then we go into a chorus, only once this time, then we go into a verse, and then at the end of the verse, he does a little switch around where he changes the chord progression into something else, where suddenly we go from this there's this ascending stairway. This is just a way of switching things up a little bit and keeping things fresh for the listener. And we go back into 2 choruses. However, I got a little bit excited when I saw exactly what was happening here, because a few weeks ago I did a video on breaks and the different types of structures of breaks that exist. And in that video I set out 2 different types of breaks, the linear break and the trilogy break. And this song has them both. Textbook examples. I was so happy when I discovered this, so let's look at this. First, you've got yourself here the linear break, which is just where we take away the low end elements and we build up tension towards a logical break immediately, and then when the logical break should happen, it does happen. And so let me play it one more time just so you can think about it from that perspective. We've got low end elements here. No more beats, no more bass. This is a break. We've got a little noise sweep. There we go, and a drop, perfect. Into the chorus, and the chorus happens twice, and then suddenly everything goes really quiet. So I'll play you their trilogy break. Again, trilogy break is just a word I made up to describe this phenomenon. I don't think there is a canonical way of describing this, so I'm going to keep calling this a trilogy break. But what it has is first the fall, then the rise, and then the hang, if you'll recall. If you don't recall, check this video. I do highly recommend it. So I'll play you the entire break. Of course, you have to imagine this with the vocal. Without the vocal, it doesn't totally come to its right, but that's what we're doing right now. So did you feel what happened there? First of all, there was the fall where it says we're really going to reset the energy here. We're going to add a bunch of auto filters. So what I do to a lot of these synths here is I add an auto filter for this particular section. Just low passing it. And we've got this ascending staircase, which is the opposite, if you'll recall, from what we did previously, where it's always going down, 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 and then here we're going up, up, up. It's just geometry. And it's doing it at half time. So here, every 1 bar, we're changing the chord, whereas previously the chords were changing every bar. So this is visibly, everything is slowing down. Everything is coming to a standstill, because that way, when we start speeding things up again in the second half, when we add this long organ to it, things feel like they're really kicking into gear, you know, and there's noise sweep, which implies that we're definitely coming into the climax here, but then we don't. We hang for a moment, and then the drop comes. So here we go, we do that ascending staircase, but much faster, and we add in this organ. Just this, kind of a church organ type sound, again, just made with Ableton stock stuff. Boom, and notice that little tom there? I think that's a very cute detail that they do in the original as well. And then we just go straight back into the regular beat section of the chorus. And so remember that when you're doing a pop song like this, where the chorus is the hook you want to drive home, if you want them to remember one thing, it's the chorus. So every section of the song almost becomes a way of anticipating the chorus and then making it satisfying when the chorus arrives. Like, we build up the information from the start, for instance, with a 6-bar intro, the beat, adding a little bit of vocal, and then going into the chorus. So we take the shortest route possible of getting into the chorus, then we do a little verse, then another chorus, then everything builds up. Oh, there's a switch around, back into the chorus, then there's a long build up to get back into the chorus, so that the chorus is really where the payoff is and everything else is like the on-ramp into that chorus. As a small detail, it's kind of cute that the outro actually is the mirror image of the intro, where they do that road shimmer vocal, the pitch down vocal hook a little bit, then they put the beat and then a 6-bar outro. So it's perfectly symmetrical from the introduction. And there you have it, Heat Waves by Glass Animals. Totally dissected, totally geeked out over. I've been listening to this song on repeat so many times with my sister here that this has been very therapeutic to get it out of my system. In the future, I will be continuing to mix in both dance music, techno, and pop music in this channel, because I think we can learn from the production from all of these things equally. So let me know in the comments what other things you'd like to see me dissect. In the meantime, go ahead and watch another music production video. Here, take care, stay producing, be good to one another, and bye-bye.